Hello and welcome to the Wires discussion today on making public information available to everyone. My name is Anuj Srivas and today our guest is Carl Malamud. Carl has been described as everything from the internet's own instigator to America's unofficial public printer. But Carl's mission over the last 25 years has been to use the internet to make publicly accessible or available information, more accessible and more available to everyone possible. Over the last 10 years, a lot of his work is centered around, legislation, legal codes, standards, and so on and so forth. And more often than not, this brings him into confrontation with government authorities who would like to regulate or disseminate this information in a very selective manner. But thank you, Carlo, for joining us.
My pleasure.
My pleasure today. And I mean, for our viewers who are not familiar with your work, could you walk through what it is to sort of, make information that is supposed to be public, in a more public fashion available to the people?
Well, so the information I deal with is information that most people agree should be public, but for some reason is not. It's locked behind a paywall because of inertia, or the government agency is not technically able to handle the problem, or somebody wants to be the vendor, wants to be exclusive. So what I look for is large databases like the US Patent Database. In that case, I bought all the data. The Patent Office was selling it, so it took a few $100,000, which I was able to raise. I bought it, I put it online, millions of people started to use it, and I went knocking on the Patent Office's door and said, you know what? This is your job. You should be doing it. And that's always my goal, is not to put myself in the patent business or another business. It's to make government better, to show them that people actually care about this information. With the patent database, the patent commissioner actually told me he just didn't think ordinary Americans would care about this stuff. Put it online, millions of people started using it.
Right. So, but in some cases, this information, for example, is available to the public, but for a fee. For instance, and how do you deal with that when it comes to the government agency that makes money off of it?
Well, so revenue is very important for any government agency, any NGO. In the case of the Patent Office, they were making $40 million a year selling patents. But you know what? The whole purpose of patents, this is the only database that's specifically called out in the United States Constitution. It's not there to be sold. They can make money doing other things, and they can actually sell the data. The question is, once I've bought it, am I able to republish it in a way that makes it better and more useful? So I don't even mind if there's a fee for service for information. The question is, are you then allowed, without a license, to use that information, make it better, inform your fellow citizens, do something with it?
Correct, that's true. And so, I mean, some of your work here, your work has also extended to India, and over the last a couple of years. And as I understand it, you're currently, for instance, in a legal battle with the Bureau of Indian Standards. Could you talk to us a little bit about this and how it started, from the beginning?
So there's a couple kinds of laws, right? Legal materials, edicts of government. There's acts of a parliament. There's government regulations. But safety standards are some of the most important laws in our modern world. The National Building Code of India, the standards for textile machinery that keeps workers safe, for the safe application of pesticides. And all these Indian standards are noticed in the official gazettes. They have the force of law. In many cases, you may not sell products in India unless they are certified, and they may not be certified by BIS unless they meet standards, and they're all government publications. Despite that, there is not only a copyright notice, there is a notice that you may not copy this stuff without our permission, and they sell it. The National Building Code of India costs 14,000 rupees in India. That's a lot of money for a book that every engineering student in India needs to study. If you buy it in a foreign land, it costs 1.4 lakh rupees, 10 times as much. If you want to do business with India, you need to know what the safety laws of India are.
Correct, right. And so in 2013, I believe you took some of this data and made it public, but the BIS didn't appreciate that.
Well, BIS didn't notice. What happened at first is I purchased a number of Indian standards. One of the things I do is I don't sneak around, I don't hide. And so I called Mr. Sam Petroda, who was in government at the time, working for Manmohan Singh. and said, Petroda, I'd like to come see you. And I went and saw him, and I brought copies of standards. And I explained the situation. I said, I'm going to put these online. What do you think? He goes, this is good. I said, well, the Bureau of Indian Standards might be annoyed. He goes, this is important information. It should be available. They didn't notice. I took all 19,000 standards. I put them online. I paid $5,000 a year for the DVD. And then it came time to renew my subscription.
Sure.
And so I sent them a letter. I said, yes, here's a purchase order. I would love to renew my subscription. By the way, here's all the standards, and we've taken 971 of them and we've transformed them into HTML. We've redrawn the diagrams as SVG graphics. We've recoded the formulas as MathML. Would you like copies of all that information? And I got a letter back saying, basically, stop. You must stop immediately. They refused to renew my subscription. They demanded we take them down. So I sent them a letter back, and I explained why. In my belief, under the Indian system of government, under the Indian Constitution, under the Right to Information Act, this was public information, and they disagreed. So we petitioned the ministry. That's the next step. Big fancy petition. Petroda did an affidavit. Vint Cerf, father of the internet, did an affidavit. A number of very prominent professors of water engineering and transportation signed affidavits. We had examples of why the standards looked better, why we were adding values. Went up to the ministry, and after a while we got an answer back saying, no, you can't do it. And so the next step is a public interest litigation suit, along with my colleague Srinivas Kodali, who is a very talented young transportation engineer, and Dr. Sushant Sinha, who does the amazing Indian Kanun. We filed suit. The law firm of Nishis Desai agreed to represent us pro bono. They're not charging any money. Salman Khurshid, former Minister of Law, agreed to represent us pro bono as our senior advocate. We are in front of the Honorable High Court of Delhi in New Delhi. It is papered over in the sense of BIS has answered our complaint. We responded. The union government has failed to respond. And so we're before the court again in November 13th. And our hope is that the Chief Justice or the judge who is presiding will order an oral argument early next spring, that we will have our day to state our piece, that the government will state its piece, and the government will render a verdict.
Sure. So Carl, as I understand it here, BIS's defense rests on copyright for one. But another thing that it also talks about is the fact that it needs to be compensated for creating these standards. And so one of the differences between the United States and India is that in the United States, standards which eventually become law and regulation are formulated by private bodies. But here in India, the BIS is a statutory body that sometimes, I would say most of the standards it comes up with eventually assume the force of law. And to a certain extent, its revenues come from selling these standards to companies, to colleges, to private individuals. So are you opposed to BIS's revenue model as well? Do you believe that in this day and age it needs to be made public, and we shouldn't worry about the cost that went into creating those standards in the first place?
So let's deal with India, and then let's deal with the rest of the world.
Sure.
So in India, these are government documents. Less than 4% of their revenue comes from the sale of standards. If you want to sell a product in India, it has to be certified. You know who you pay for the certification? Bureau of Indian Standards. They get plenty of money. Not only that, this is vital to their mission, right? The public safety. And by rationing access to standards, you are not educating engineers nearly as well as you could. You are not allowing local officials to enforce the building code the way they need to, because they have to spend 14,000 rupees in order to purchase one of these things. So rationing access to public safety and information runs counter to their mission, and they don't need the money. They have money coming in from other places. Now, the rest of the world has private NGOs develop the standards, and then government adopts them into law. Let me say a couple things. The NGOs want these to be the law. That is the entire purpose of the National Electrical Code of the United States, and they boast it is the law in all 50 states and the federal government. They want that. They sell it for a lot of money, but you know what? Again, they have certification. and handbooks and training. And when the federal government says the National Electrical Code is the law of the land, they get the gold seal of approval of the American people. And they ought to be able to monetize that gold seal without rationing public safety information. So they claim they need the money, but I don't think that's the reason. I think it's a matter of control. I think it's the way they always did it. But you know what? The internet has forced every industry in the world to adjust its business model. Time makes us adjust our business models. Selling a standard for a reasonable amount of money in 1970 made sense. Selling a building code, a book for 14,000 rupees in this day and age. Right? And this little USB, this is all 19,000 standards. This is the whole thing. There's no reason this shouldn't be available for every student in India, at least on a non-commercial basis for education. But I think it ought to be available to every industry and every local official, because that's how we enforce public safety, as everybody knows the law.
Correct. And Carl, part of your mission, part of the work of many other public domain advocates, is not just that this information needs to be made accessible for free and so on and so forth, but also the quality of access. For instance, the documents you should be able to zoom in, or should be a more aesthetically pleasing format, that people could actually use it for research. And so a little bit of that work extends to, your Digital Library of India and, the kind of work that you've been putting in over the last 2 years. Could you elaborate a little bit about this?
Well, so for the standards, right, we retype many of them into HTML, including the building code. We redraw the diagrams, recode the formulas. The Digital Library of India, they claimed it was 550,000 books up on a government server, long-term program scanning books all over India.
Sorry, they here is?
They is the government of India. The government of India, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, is a sponsor of this project. And I noticed this Digital Library of India, and I looked at it, and I saw two things. It wasn't very accessible, right? It was hard to search. The server kept going down. They kept losing DNS. The server would disappear. And so I made a copy and I put it online. And I looked at it carefully. There's some copyright issues in the database. They were sloppy. But the metadata is bad. Titles are wrong. The scanning was a little sloppy. They not only just skewed pages, but missed pages, or half a book is gone, or they screwed up the resolution. And so we made a copy and we put it online, and the intent is to make it better, put it on the Internet Archive. 1 million views a month we were getting on this thing. It became more visible. We got a few takedown notices, and that happens in the big leagues. You get takedown notices and you respond to them. You say, okay, fine, I'll remove it.
In certain cases, you're happy to comply with them as well.
Oh, absolutely. If someone says this book is copyright, it's not a problem. We'll remove it immediately. No big deal. And when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands or millions of books like Brewster Kahle has on the Internet Archive, you get those. Mistakes happen. The government freaked out because it became more visible, and they got a couple notices from people saying, oh my God, you've got my book. And they took the entire database down. And they asked us to take the entire database down. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. They said, well, take down everything from 1900 on.
What kind of books are part of this collection?
It's an amazing collection. 50 different languages. So about half are in Romance languages, English, German, French. Historical books, nonfiction, Gazette of India, all sorts of gazettes for different states. 50,000 books in Sanskrit, books in 30,000 in Gujarati. I'm not sure of these numbers, but it's in the tens of thousands in Punjabi, books in Tibetan, books going back 1,000 years. Just this amazing, unique collection that's unavailable anyplace else in the world. I'm getting notes from India scholars from all over the world saying, oh my God, this is great. And we make it available in a different way. You can navigate much more easily. People can very quickly send us notices and say, oh, you got the metadata wrong, and we're able to fix it. And so we're trying to make it better. But the government said, no, you have to take it offline, and we will tell you which books are okay, because we are going to examine them one by one and decide which are copyrighted and which are not. And I don't think, first of all, I'm not sure I believe they're the experts in what is copyright and what is not. And copyright's not a binary thing, right? If you're blind, I can make access to any book under an international treaty. Under the Indian Copyright Act, if it's for educational purposes between a teacher and a pupil, that's what the Delhi University case is all about. And so it's not a binary thing. And I just don't think it's the government's job to tell you what to read and what not to read, and certainly not their job to tell me which books to make available on the internet.
Correct. That's true.
Unless there's some national security issue or something of that sort. But if it's simply we don't like it, it's like, I'm sorry, I don't care.
Correct. So, and now we've come across the situation where the IT ministry has taken their library down, and yours is the only version that's up.
It is, which is nuts, absolutely nuts. And instead of like having this fight with the government, I'd much rather that we were making the database better, that I was working with them, that we were scanning more books, that we were doing what we do on our Wha Raj Collection, which is very, very high quality material. Can I tell you about that?
Sure.
So the Wha Raj Collection started with the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, all 100 volumes, right? Available online, anybody can read them, you can download PDF, you can download ebook. I found 129 All India radio broadcasts of Gandhiji speaking every couple days during the last year of his life. So you can walk through the last year of his life. For each of those, I took the relevant portion of the collected works, put it into HTML, so you can listen to him in Hindi or Gujarati. You can read the English translation. You can then click into the collected works and see the letters he wrote that day. What did he do the next day? What did he do the previous day? We have the selected works of Nehru. Many of them were on a government server, but they were missing some volumes. So I got those volumes, so we have the most complete version of that. The works of Ambedkar, collected works, were on the Maharashtra state server, but they were missing the last 6 volumes. So again, most complete version. Bharat et Koj. Beautiful, beautiful show based on the discovery of India. Really, really nicely done. It was in the 1980s when Doordarshan was a government agency. So we didn't just put that online. We added subtitles in a whole variety of different languages. Not for all the episodes because we didn't have enough money, but for 5 of the episodes you can now have subtitles in Hindi, which they didn't have. They had English, but also Urdu and Telugu and other languages. So we're trying to make it better and more useful.
Sure. Carl, I mean, so some people view public domain advocacy work, kind of work that you do, as completely opposed to copyright. And they believe that sometimes you may or may not tread the line of piracy, for instance. And,
not a pirate. Not a pirate.
But your own work, how do you decide when to jump into a project? Is it about public interest? Is that the test that you consider when
Well, it's partly public interest, so I look at a whole variety of things. So first of all, let me say this. I made a living as a professional writer. Okay? I was a musician. I believe in copyright. I think it's an amazing thing. But remember, the purpose of copyright is to advance the useful arts. It's to make knowledge more available. And there are limits and exceptions to copyright. If you have private property, you need public parks in the middle. You can't have a city without both. You want commerce, but you want civic life. And so I look at this and I ask myself, is it government data? Is the copyright assertion valid? Is it in the public interest? Is there a compelling need for this information? And if it's government information that regulates the public safety or the operation of corporations or is the official method of notifying citizens of the acts of the government, clearly public, absolutely clearly public. But I study it very carefully. A lot of people do this kind of stuff and they think, oh, you're a hacker. Well, I have tech skills, there's no doubt about it. Not as good as a lot of the kids that are out there, but I've been doing this a long time. And I'm pretty good at big databases and textual stuff. But I think very, very carefully before putting something online, and I study it. I do a lot of research. With the Indian standards, I just didn't jump in. I spent a lot of time. I got that 3-volume treatise on constitutional law, and I read very carefully. I looked at it. I'm not a lawyer, but I read that. I went and saw San Petroda. I talked to a bunch of people, and only after doing that did I decide, okay, it is my belief that this is public information. And you know what? If I was wrong, I will suffer the consequences. And that's the other part of doing this kind of work, is if you do make a mistake, you might have to pay a penalty, and you need to be prepared for that.
That's true. So one thing, I'd like to just shift tacks a little bit here and talk about the government, not only the Indian government, generally across the world, the government response to the kind of work that you do. So currently in India, this government, the Modi government, the previous government, they've both publicly maintained that we want to use technology for greater transparency, we want to use technology for greater public information access, e-governance and so on and so forth. But sometimes the very first reaction they have to when someone comes out and does some work like this is one of hostility. And we've seen a lot of people like yourself in India receive legal notices. You yourself are fighting a legal battle, as you've pointed out. Is there a contradiction between the way the governments claim what they're standing for, and their actual actions when it comes to this, and how do you view your role?
So bureaucracies, really will fight back on this kind of a thing. So I went and saw, San Petrote and said, go for it. But the Bureau of Indian Standards are like, no, we've always done it this way. Everybody else does it this way. And so if you were to go to them as a transparency advocate or as a government minister, particularly as a government minister, you're going to get an 8-hour-long meeting with 15 BIS executives explaining why the sky will fall. And when you're in governance, you have to be careful. You don't want to break things. And so even if you're trying to push for openness, the Obama administration was very good at that, but you can only go so far. And so working with civic society is important. And again, you do face hostility sometimes, and a lot of my job is attempting to explain why it is we're doing what we're doing, why this is the right thing to do. One of the prime techniques I have is I get millions of people using the information, because then all of a sudden it's not just some open government guy saying, you should be doing it better. It's like, look, millions of engineering students in India use this information every day. This is why you should have it. And look, the sky hasn't fallen, right? You're still selling standards. And you know what? Even if I give away all the standards, there are people that are going to want certified copies of the standards, and they're going to want, the complete edition of all prior versions. And all I care about is the stuff that has legal import.
So do you see yourself as a stakeholder that's trying to get the government to do its job better with regard to public
That is exactly what I'm trying to do. I want to put myself out of business. I don't want to be doing Indian standards. BIS knows that way better than me. I don't have the source code, right? I've got to take a PDF file and retype it to turn it into HTML, or if I'm lucky, it's born digital, but even then I have to reformat it, right? Because you pull it out of PDF, paragraph marks, italics, footnotes, superscripts, tremendous amount of work. If I had their original Word files, I'm assuming that's what it is, it'd be trivial. It's their job. They should be doing it. They should have it available for bulk access so anybody could download it. And so Indian Canoon, for example, could just, boom, incorporate it into their search engine. And that's a good thing, because all of a sudden the standards are all over. Everybody knows safety standards. We have a safer world.
Sure, that's true. And so, just to wrap up this discussion, this concept of a safer world, generally, in your previous speeches and talks that I've heard, you talk about the link between greater access to public information and genuinely perhaps understanding and solving current social, economic, political problems of today's time. Why do you believe that these two are connected?
We have a number of problems in our world that look intractable, that look unsolvable. Global warming. A lot of people just don't believe it's true. Or they're not taking action. Or their self-interest says, I'm not going to take action because I run a coal mine. And I like pollution because I make more money on it. Intolerance towards other people. Poverty, right? Education is the way out of poverty. Famine, disease. And the question is, what can we do about these problems? And I firmly believe that access to knowledge is the only way we're going to move forward. So if all citizens begin to understand climate change, at some point they will demand we take action, because it truly is a global crisis. We must take action. And the more people that understand, I don't care which government it is, they are politicians. And if everybody is standing up saying, global warming, oh my God, we've got to do something. Look at these hurricanes, look at these fires, look at these droughts. Then we will have change. Education is one of the key pressing issues right now. Disease. You never know where solutions to disease are going to come from. One of the things I've learned on the internet when I put bulk information online, some random person always comes in and makes it better. Somebody you never thought of. And I'm convinced every generation has a promise. It might have been aerodynamics. It might have been the elimination of involuntary servitude, right? It might be suffrages for all women, for all people. It might be technology, it might be social change. I think our great promise, the internet is there, it works. Universal access to all knowledge is something we can do. And I am firmly convinced it will make the world a better place.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carl. Thanks for your time, and
pleasure. Thank you very
we'll be
much.
following your case and the issues that you've been working on closely at the Wire as well.